welcome, welcome everyone. Welcome to the second day. I think it's the second day of the 2023 CFA Equity Conference. This conference is entitled Co-Conspiring for an Equitable Future, Building the Social Justice Bridge. We are so happy to have you here today, and I thank you for your time. My name is Leslie Bryan, and I am the co-chair of the Disability Caucus, and I'm recently retired lecturer from the San Bernardino campus, teaching in the Theater Arts Department. I'll describe myself. I am a middle-aged African-American woman with light skin, curly, short hair. I'm wearing a royal blue sweatshirt that has a geometric image of a young Black man on it and words that say, "My voice, my power." Behind me, I have my two favorite photos, one with two young Black girls in a scene that reminds me of Daughters of the Dust, two Black girls at the beach, and the other side, two Black women in church lady hats. And this is pretty much what I have behind me while I'm talking. My computer's been a little wonky today, so if it goes out, it does come right back. So I'll be right back if that happens. I don't know what's going on, but it's been happening this morning. Before we get started, and in keeping with CFA tradition, I would like to do the land acknowledgement that has been approved by our CFA Native American and Indigenous Caucus folks. And so also in the chat, you'll see a link that you can find your own lands that you live and work on that you can do while I'm talking or after. We want to acknowledge that we gather as the California Faculty Association on the traditional lands of the Indigenous people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we habit as well. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territories we reside on, and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought us to reside on the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current, ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. Acknowledging the land is an important Indigenous protocol that we are honoring here today. And again, you can drop in the chat the lands that you're from, and you can look it up on the link that I know will go in the chat. So let us come together. This is our grounding in moment. This is our kind of community breath that I'd like to kind of talk you all through. You can turn your screens off if you need privacy, would like some privacy. We're just going to be doing a collective breath, maybe a little stretch of the arms as we do that, and do that in any way that is comfortable for yourself, sitting, standing, adapt as needed. So just kind of sitting here and trying to let all this outside energy and distractions go away a little bit. And we're just going to take a deep breath in through our nose and hold that for a moment. Then exhale through your mouth. And just kind of feeling that energy that we may have been holding go away as we breathe in again, good air. And hold that for a moment. And as you exhale, if you feel like you need to move the body a little bit, I'm twisting my head back and forth and kind of moving my spine a little bit. I've been sitting too long. As you do that exhale. And just thinking about the conversation we're going to have today from Imani, I'm so excited, and bringing that energy into the room, into the space, and what you may gain from it to take back to your campus, just for yourself, to your students, and just bringing our focus into that moment. And taking one more collective breath together, I'm going to lift my arms as I do that. And then holding that for a moment, and then exhaling down. And if you are off video, I welcome you to turn it back on and come back in the moment with us. Felt good just doing that little stretch. And so now I would like to read our CFA interruption practice statement. As part of our continuing commitment to racial justice work, When we experience examples of racial narratives, racism, or whiteness in our meetings, or as we conduct our business, we will speak up. This means we can interrupt the meeting and draw the issue to one another's attention. We will do this kindly, with care, and in good faith. Further, as we engage interruptions, we will take an intersectional approach, reflecting the fact that white supremacy and racism operate in tandem with interlocking systems of oppression of a colonialism, class, cis heteropatriarchy, and ableism. This statement is a reminder that we commit to do this in the service of ending the system of racial oppression. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Kiki, who will give us some logistics kind of information.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Leslie. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. Just a few helpful bits of information. We have ASL, American Sign Language, and closed captioning services that are being provided today. They are being spotlighted and will switch off as the session goes on. To activate closed captioning, you can click on the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen and then click Show Subtitle to view those captions. Please note that this equity conference session will be recorded and posted at a later date to our CFA YouTube page and our Council for Racial and Social Justice webpage. Please note also that the chat function will be disabled, but the Q&A function will be enabled. Don't forget, very important, keep yourself nourished and hydrated with something good today. Be informed that there is a meal reimbursement for attending equity sessions. We've got $28 if you attend for one meeting, and we've got $59 if you attend 2 or more, and that's for every day of the equity conference. Don't forget to turn in those receipts and that form that I will be dropping in chat and that was emailed to you this morning to accounts payable. There's a few other things. If you need to register for other equity conference sessions, I will drop that link in chat. And we have books that you can purchase from our equity presenters with a discount code. I will be dropping that also in chat from some of our presenters. And lastly, our beautiful equity conference landing page where you can find all these bits of information. Everything you need is on that page. I will be dropping that in chat as well. That will be all for our helpful bits of information today. If you need anything else, just check out that landing page that I will be dropping. Have a great session, everyone. Back to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Kiki. All right, so here we go. Our presenter this morning is Imani Barbarin, and her presentation is entitled Crutches and Spice. Imani was our first speaker at last year's Equity Conference, and she rocked the house. She set the tone for the week with her fabulous presentation and her hope for the future. We got so many requests and positive comments that we invited her to come back and speak to us again. If you would like to see last year's presentation, you can find it on our CFA website. But it was so good, we asked her to come back again this year, and she said she would, so she's here with us today. When I'm done in a second, I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I would like to read the program workshop description. This workshop will center ableism. Imani Barbarin describes ableism as having always been the best way to perpetuate white supremacy under the guise of progress for the disability community. Now more than ever, white disabled people are presented with a choice: white supremacy or disability justice. Most disabled Black, Indigenous, and people of color are firm trying to pull the disability community in the direction of justice because whiteness has created the emergency and there are disabled BIPOC in the building scrambling towards safety. And so with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our fabulous presenter. Let her introduce herself and then take it away. Imani.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bryan. Thank you so much for the team, for the California Faculty Association. Thank you so much for having me, for asking me back. I'm always wondering whether or not people are going to ask me back, depending on what I've said. So this is a great indication that I'm on the right path.
Yes.
I am Imani Barbarin. I am, a quick image description of myself is that I am an African-American woman in my 30s. I have below shoulder length red dreadlocks. I'm wearing a bright pink sweater because bright is where it's at. And I'm utilizing a digital green background. because all of our lives are a little bit messy because of the pandemic, and I would prefer mine stay private. But again, thank you all for having me. We're going to kick it off very quickly today. So I'm going to be talking today, as discussed, about ableism and about the toolkit that is ableism. Specifically, we're going to talk about how ableism isolates and obscures the perspectives of queer, disabled, Black, Indigenous, and people of color when inclusion is vital for our liberation. And we will explore structures like white supremacy and ableism and how it informs our notions about who has voices worth valuing and what can be done to tread the path of liberation. When I talk about disability, when I talk about marginalization in general, what I am speaking of is this idea that any sort of marginalization is inherently disabling. I'll give a little bit of background about myself. I talk about ableism online. I talk about being disabled, being Black, and being a queer woman throughout society. And I find that so many intersections exist for all of my identities, that they all kind of hone in to one, and society's neglect and mistreatment of myself and people like me often wears itself on my body or excludes me from society entirely. I am known as Crutches and Spice online because the spice is always going to come with it. And I use hashtags like abled or weird, things disabled people know, disabled compliments, amongst many others, to make sure that we can talk about disability out in the open as disabled folks, particularly loving to center the voices of Black, queer, Indigenous, and otherwise marginalized disabled people. When we talk about ableism, when we talk about disability, again, we are recentering our framework of what ableism actually does to marginalized people. To start that though, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page as to what it means to have a disability, what disability is in American society in particular. According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, to be protected by the ADA, one must have a disability, which is defined by the ADA as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. A person who has a record of such an impairment, or a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. That is an incredibly broad definition. And what is very important is that we have this idea or this notion throughout society that there's like this list of disabilities, that disability is only as outlined by who gets care, who gets systemic intervention to be able to survive society. And that's not necessarily true. It just means that the way you function, body, mind, does not fit in with outer society or greater society, as it were. I think I also want to point out to you all that there's something that sticks out about that definition. Can people put in the chat what sticks out to them about that definition? I could read it again if you all would like. The definition is, a disability is defined by the ADA as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a person who has a history or record of such an impairment, or a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. What sticks out about that definition? The disability has to be seen or perceived by others. Yeah, that's incredibly important. That is an incredibly important distinction. Thank you. People have been using the Q&A function for this, so that works perfectly. It's not always easy to have it recorded. Yes, very difficult to have it recorded. But the point that I really want to hammer home, it is that it is perceived by others as being limiting to one or more major life activities. When we talk about disability, when we talk about ableism, we also have to talk about how it has historically been weaponized against marginalized communities. That is a major factor in not only who is seen as having a disability, but who is fearful of disclosing a disability historically, and why that would be. Excuse me, just moving along my notes. Disability is also political and cultural through the lens of white supremacy, patriarchy, and heteronormativity. When we talk about disability, we have to keep in mind the communities that have had disability systemically wielded against them. So let's talk a little bit about what ableism is. I, generally speaking, work off of the definition that ableism is the interpersonal, institutional, and societal discrimination against disabled people. A very good definition is by Talila Lewis, a disability and queer advocate, that says that a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression that leads to people and society determining people's value based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth, living place, health or wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, and behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. Again, that is a working definition by Talila Lewis, updated in January 2022. That is incredibly important when we talk about ableism in our society. You do not have to be disabled. So the systems are set up such that a lack of healthcare, a lack of access to clean water can all be disabling factors in the way in which you are perceived and move through life and society. So what does ableism look like in action? Can some people tell me what ableism looks like in action? What does that look like as a society? Assuming there's only one way to give or receive. Yeah, a focus on impairment. Subjectivity. Making statements of what people can do and not do. Passing the test. The assumptions we have about disability. Yes, for me, ableism, the entirety of ableism looks like a lot of assumptions around capability. Capability. I tell people that in order to unlearn your own ableism, you have to unlearn your notions of who is capable of doing good or doing harm or directing one's own life or telling their own story. One of the very first things that we lose as disabled people, whether we are born with our disability or we acquire our disability later in life, is the ability to be reliable narrators of our own stories, the ability to tell people what we want for our lives. Everyone is acting upon us based off of how we should ideally behave and ideally be throughout society. But nobody asks us directly, what do we want? Where do we want to be and who do we want to be in this life? And that is intentional, because when we think about the communities who have historically higher rates of disability, we then segregate disabled people from society. We tell them exactly where to live. We tell them exactly who to be, and then we leave them there. And that's it. Again, the expectation that everyone work in the same way, having our spaces set up around ideal bodies and how they work, feel, or express, and assumptions, that is all under the umbrella Some of the things that I have written down here are a lack of representation in the media. Again, wanting to be able to tell our own stories. Disabled people account for 26% of the population, but 3% of speaking roles in film and TV. Lifting requirements for jobs. Have you ever applied to a job and there's some inexplicable lifting requirement for something like data entry, where you're just moving data from one database to another? You're not lifting anything. You wouldn't be lifting anything, and yet it's right there. That's to filter disabled people out from applying. Inaccessible transportation systems, subminimum wages, forced sterilizations through Buck v. Bell, forced abortions, forced institutionalization, anti-vaccination activism. That's a huge one. High rates of filicide, or the killing of disabled people within households. And then 70% of polling places being inaccessible, and 30 to 50% of people being killed by police having a disability, according to the Ruderman Foundation. Disability is always political, and ableism has always been a tool for systems of oppression. I really encourage people to read history, read books about history, and then listen to how we talk about disability. When we think about the past, when we think about ailments and illnesses, we don't really think about them with our modern concepts of disability. But they all exist. They exist right there. So how does disability impact multiply marginalized today? Food deserts that impact a person's ability for fresh food and vegetables. When you live in a food desert, you are less likely to get the nutrients that you need, which can often lead to things like diabetes, heart disease, issues like that. Additionally, redlining is tied to respiratory illnesses, because Black homes and homes of marginalized people are usually situated next to highways and busy transportation systems. High rates of asthma and respiratory illnesses. Black and brown neighborhoods situated next to pollutants or without clean water. We are seeing a lot in the news about how train derailments and chemical spills are, impacting neighborhoods and communities around the country. That is not new. There's also negligence regarding climate change and who will be able to survive, extreme weather events, extreme situations in which they need access to healthcare and emergency services. When we talk about climate change, disabled people are the most likely to be impacted by massive weather events. And without much of the recourse that is recommended, when you see people telling you to prepare an earthquake bag with extra meds, where do you get those extra meds from if you're a disabled person? Where they tell you to have a jug of water or canned goods, how do you carry that if you have physical disability and live alone? What does your survival mean when even the preparation is inaccessible to you? There's also the legislating that medical professionals do not have to treat queer individuals based off of their own religious beliefs. That means access to healthcare becomes more difficult. Accessing the right healthcare professional becomes more difficult. And as we continue to criminalize trans and queer people, their access to healthcare, our access to healthcare, will be cut off entirely, as we will not know who to trust with our medical information. Additionally, medical racism leads to disability, and medical sexism do as well. And then also the overturning of Roe v. Wade. When we talk about disability and autonomy, we must talk about reproductive care and access, which can be very disabling if you are in a situation in which you cannot end a pregnancy that is leading to things like sepsis, infection, diabetes, any host of issues. There's a whole list of things that can go wrong in a pregnancy, and people are becoming disabled from not getting access to timely abortion services. So with that in mind, I really want people to think about, how does disability show up in the bodies of communities? How do we actively look at the numbers around disability and marginalization? Because the rates of disability are much higher, factually just much higher if you are a marginalized person. So I want to give you this data to arm yourselves with. About 2 in 5 trans adults have a disability. 1 in 4 LGBT adults have a disability. Again, the national rate is about 26%. Cool. In communities of color, Indigenous folks and Black folks have the highest rates of disability. Indigenous folks have a rate of disability of 3 in 10. Black folks have a rate of disability of 1 in 4. And again, I need to be hammered home. These are self-reported numbers. When we think about the history of who is valued based off of their physical productivity, people are going to hide disabilities as best they can to not be segregated from society due to a disability. Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders have a rate of disability of 1 in 6. Hispanic, a rate of disability of 1 in 6. And Asian people of Asian descent have a disability rate of 1 in 10. And these are provided by the CDC. And let me just look at the previous numbers. The previous numbers were from the LGBTQ map. Just making sure that you have those sources if you ever want to use this data going forward. And then 1 in 4 women have a disability, and you are actually at a greater risk for gender-based violence once you have a disability. So I also want to hammer home that based off of the definition of disability that we saw earlier, that disability is also something that is observed in you by other people. That means that anybody can accuse you or say that you have a disability, or society's parameters of what a disability is can change. And that's important that we note that that has been historically weaponized against communities. Again, anyone can experience ableism regardless of a diagnosis. And systems of power often use disability and medicalize features or actions of the oppressed. So for instance, runaway slave syndrome. That used to be a diagnosable illness that Black people who wanted freedom were institutionalized for, or were medicalized or harmed in order to beat that syndrome out of them. That is our history, the runaway slave syndrome. Additionally, when we talk about it, we have to talk about hysteria, the idea behind hysteria. Women, I believe in the 1800s, were practicing sexual freedom and really coming to terms with the lives that they wanted to lead. And those ideas around femininity and feminism and self-autonomy for women, or women perceived people, were deemed hysteria. You don't want to live a life of those women of the night, or those women who are single, or those spinsters, or whomever. You're hysterical. You don't want sexual freedom. You don't want autonomy. You're hysterical. You are mentally ill. And then we also have a long and storied history of queerness as a mental illness. Even to this day, we have certain politicians saying that being trans is psychosis or autism or a mental illness, that there's some other reason why somebody would want to be a different gender or identify as a different gender, other than that's just who they are. It has to be a mental illness. It has to be some sort of diagnosable illness so that we can treat it and get rid of it. The goal is to get rid of disability in its entirety. That is eugenics. Eugenics wants us to orchestrate the most perfect group of people that we can. And that's who's going to carry us forward, not the people who cannot or will not contribute to society. This then makes communities susceptible to systemic ableism that disabled people are known to face. That's on purpose. The being forced into poverty just so that you can have access to healthcare or benefits or to take part in the social safety net. That's on purpose. That disabled people cannot acquire wealth or own our own homes in a lot of cases or get married in many cases. That's intentional. And in a turn of events, which is very upsetting, there are many who become complicit in oppression of the other to demonstrate the value of the self. We often think of these people as tokens or, tokens that supremacy culture likes to whip out and say, well, this person is successful. This person who's oppressed, who should be oppressed, is successful. Therefore, the rest of you are faking. The rest of you are not trying hard enough. The rest of you are disposable. And there's many of us in our communities that look at ourselves and say, I'm that person. I'm the person that goes above and beyond. They are not trying hard enough. So I'm going to emphasize the way in which I am valuable in comparison to them so that I stay alive, so that I am allowed to remain in society. When we talk about disability, I like to bring up this quote by Alison Kafer from her book, Feminist Queer Crip, that disability is never seen by society as a permanent existence, but always something to be overcome over time. Disability is not permitted to exist as a part of a desired present or desirable future. We are always supposed to be working our way out of a disability, being exemplary, being an example of who is valuable to society. Isn't that tiring? To think that there's something so innate to the way you interact with the world, with yourself, with your neighbors, with your friends, that we're always supposed to be working against, that we're always supposed to be erasing or hiding. It's important to note that there's a division in the community, not really a division, but there are different labels in the community for invisible and visible disabilities. There's so many people with invisible disabilities throughout our society that are so fearful of asking for accommodations because they want to be seen as valuable, as somebody that matters, as somebody that is a part of society, that contributes to society, which is the phrase we love to use. This is even more true for people at multiple intersections and have historically been victims of state violence because of it. This has meant a reluctance to be identified with a disability and often hiding disabilities within ourselves, our families, and our communities. I cannot tell you how many times I work with organizations and student groups or faculty groups, and I'm given the charge of making people more comfortable with disclosing a disability. Like, that's my charge. That's what I'm supposed to be doing in that room in that moment. And they always get thrown for a loop when I ask them, well, what have you done to make people more comfortable? Have you studied up on our history as a country as it pertains to disability? Have you studied up on your history as it pertains to Blackness and differing bodies? Have you studied on Indigenous erasure as it pertains to our healthcare system and the way that we specifically steal resources and then keep people in Indigenous communities from accessing healthcare that they need, and then demonize them for it, for being ill, for being sick? If you cannot tell me that you can do that, if you cannot study what has come before you say, oh, just disclose a disability, then you don't deserve to hear somebody's illness. You're not safe to be tasked with that vulnerability. This is a charge. It is an honor for somebody to trust you enough with their illness, with their disability, and then to ask you for help. That is an honor. We should treat it as such. We police our association with disability every single day through hustle culture, through an obsession with fit bodies, trying to overcome or outperform disability, thinking of rest as laziness. I'm just gonna, as a Black woman, speaking to several Black women in the webinar, this is a call in, not a call out, as we like to say. Thinking of rest as laziness. Not associating with disabled people outside of charitable or infantilizing dynamics. I'm going to have a disabled person in the room, but only if everybody knows that they're lucky to be here. It's just nice to have them, right? And then also not including disabled folks in rooms, in how we discuss change and moving forward. So how do we activate, how do we advocate? How do we build better futures? The first, we have to get into communities. We have to be in community with one another. We cannot from afar. We no longer have a choice to just use words or gotchas with political speak. We have to be getting into our community, speaking with people, checking in on our neighbors. We have to build that community up. Otherwise, we do not stand a chance. We have to advocate for access to abortion for everyone, while simultaneously not throwing disabled people under the bus to do so. Not wanting to have a disabled or chronically ill child is not the only reason to need abortion access. Please stop saying it. People are recruiting disabled people utilizing that language. Fight for a fair minimum wage in your state. If you're one of the I believe 38 states that it still has legal sub-minimum wage, you need to fight for a higher minimum wage increase. At this point, $15 ain't enough. Ain't enough. We should be fighting for $30 to $40 an hour minimum wage for people to be able to make ends meet, to put food on their table. Okay? Nobody should be working 40 hours a week. You know what? I personally think nobody should be working unless, but that's a whole other thing. That's my thing. That's not your thing. No. But nobody should be houseless especially when they're working, but in general, we should not have a houseless population when we have an abundance of resources that we just refuse because we don't want property values or the value of products to go down. We need to end prison violence and the prison industrial complex. It disproportionately impacts disabled folks. Again, 30 to 50% of people killed by police have a disability, whether usually it's a mental health crisis that they are called in to intervene in. Police do not need to be there. I would venture to guess that police do not need to exist at all, especially under the Supreme Court charter that says that they do not need to act, they're not legally required to protect people. I don't know why we're paying them billions to not protect people. Fighting for trans rights so that people have access to the societies and communities in which they live. Isolating people is disabling. Not giving them access to healthcare, not making sure that they have what they need to survive is disabling. Also, intersectionally advocating for trans rights through the Americans with Disabilities Act and things like that. Ending the abuse of disabled people in conservatorships, institutions, and guardianships. We have a high rate of abuse and neglect in our community, so much so that it spawned the Protection and Advocacy Network, making sure that disabled people are not neglected through society. We have to advocate for one another. Our lives, without exaggeration, rely upon us being able to be in community with one another and listen to one another. we have this instinct in our society, especially with social media, that we want to put everything aside and start advocating and moving forward. And it's because the other guys are going to get us if we don't move forward right now. But the only way they were able to get to us in the first place, the only reason our rights are being threatened is because we didn't listen to each other in the first place. We didn't give space to one another in the first place to talk about the ways in which we are being harmed by systems and by one another. Yes, we need to move forward, and yes, we need to move forward quickly, but it cannot be done without that. It cannot be done without recognizing that every form of marginalization is inherently disabling, and that the system is weaponized against us every single day. And when we especially live in a time of mass disabling due to COVID, due to the pandemic, we have an even greater duty to make sure that we are not harming one another, that we wear a mask, that we protect ourselves and our families, that we get vaccinated if we are able to do so. It's crunch time. We really need to be advocating for one another, and we need to do so through an intersectional lens. The reason why I talk about disability as the unifier for almost every single marginalization is because it's the only thing we can all become. And knowing that it's the only thing that unifies us under these systems of oppression, through race, through class, through gender, sexuality. And if we don't pay attention to it, if we don't look for the ways in which ableism has woven its way into our daily lives, we will lose people. And sometimes that means losing ourselves. So I want you to commit to giving to your community today, to finding out who your community is, to asking them what their needs are and where you can show up for them, whether that be in the State House, on the sidewalk, or around the dinner table. Thank you.
Amazing. I have goosebumps listening to you.
Thank you.
I'm going between goosebumps and tears. Very powerful, very powerful. I'm gonna encourage folks, because we've had comments in the Q&A, but I'm gonna give folks a moment to think and see if they have questions that they'd like to ask you, because you're so riveting. I'm sure people are just like caught in your words, but just to ponder for a moment, so to say, to see if folks have questions. You can put it in the Q&A and I can read them, but you can see them also too, right, Imani?
Yeah, I can see them too.
And while folks are thinking too, one thing I have, the Disability Caucus is just starting new work with CSU EU, who's our staff union on campus, trying to do what you're saying, co-conspiring together with them and students and us faculty and all that we were, counselors, coaches, librarians, all of our unit. This is a very new project. So, what you're talking about, giving space to one another, and conspiring, so to say, is what we're trying to do right now, so that they don't separate us and kind of beat us down, so to say.
Yeah, exactly.
It's inspiring to hear you say that.
Yeah, we need to do more coalition work and, working together. I think that there's so many issues that are siloed and we think they don't interact with one another when they absolutely do.
Right.
And not really taking that into account harms everyone. Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions on how to really build that coalition together? Because those three will include pretty much everyone, all the bodies except administrators on our CSU campuses. Do you have any tips on how to make that work well, or what to watch out for? Anything?
I think the thing to watch out for is something that you probably already know, which is we need to move faster than this. We need rushing things along because we're discomforted by privilege and don't want to really address it, but we simultaneously also want to rush forward without recognizing that friction can cause rifts down the line that people then can then take advantage of. I would also suggest that you take leadership from the students themselves.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, and in my advocacy, I think that I want to get more involved in this, but like I feel like there's so many young people that are kind of drafted into political advocacy from a young age, but simultaneously without the resources to do so, or like the knowledge base, like making sure that we position ourselves as an assist to student leadership, and making sure that they have the mics, and then being like, what do you want for your future? Let's build this together. I think taking that leadership is incredibly important.
And we do have our SQE students. They had a fabulous panel this morning, which is a nice little outreach to them, and then them to other students on the campuses. So that's a good way to start that. Our students rock. I've always said that. Looking here to see if we have questions.
Yeah, we have two at the very end, I think.
Okay.
We have a few, yeah. I think you could start with Melissa.
Wait, Melissa. I don't see Melissa's. I see Sharon Elise's. Where's Melissa? Oh, there we go. I love how you have broadened ableism to encompass various dimensions of oppression. What steps can we take to address internalized disabling oppression?
Sure. So I try to tell people that, like, when you become disabled, or if you have a disability and you're just coming to terms with ableism and how it impacts your life, ableism doesn't automatically go away. It just becomes your internal monologue. What I would say is, like, the exercise I give people is to take a day and write down literally every single thing that you do and how you do it. That's the most important part, is like, how do you do what you do during the day? Because our actions are usually expressions about how we want to perform ability throughout the day. And then the next day I would look at that list and be like, what could I cut off? Or where can I insert like 20 minutes for a nap? Or how can I do things differently, like washing the dishes while seated, or cutting down on the time that I am doing labor throughout the day, so that I could build in boundaries and rest for myself. And the more you kind of take that, like, do that cycle of, building and rest for yourself, the kinder you'll be over time. But it's going to take practice, and it's not linear. So make sure you're also building in time to forgive yourself too, if you ever stray from it,
That's a good idea, definitely. And then I have Gilda has, does a disability need to be seen? What was your response to that question, please? Her internet had gone out for a bit. What was your response to that question, please, about a disability needing to be seen?
Disability does not need to be seen. Like I said, there are invisible disabilities and visible disabilities. They're all under the umbrella of disability. So if you have chronic illness, if you have asthma, which isn't really seen unless you need an inhaler, things like that, it doesn't necessarily need to be seen. It just needs to impact your daily life, or limit your daily life in any sort of way. Even if you are somebody that like wears glasses and you take them off, that you have a disability, that's your disability is just accommodated. So it really depends on how you feel it impacts your life. And nobody really can answer for you whether what you have is a disability, unless you're doing that kind of like internal work. But there's a vast number of disabilities that fall under that umbrella, even those you don't think about.
Thank you. So this one is from Sloan. I hope I'm saying that right. You mentioned ADA, Imani. What work or advocacy change is needed with FEHA specific to California? And do you have any suggestions? And then also the note of inspiring presentation. And you can tell me what FEHA is, because I don't know myself.
Yeah, I'm blanking on that abbreviation. Are you talking about the Housing Association?
Can that person add to it? Let's see what's down here. I don't know that acronym myself.
I'm assuming it's housing.
It is housing. Let's see. I'm trying to see if they've added some. Yes, housing.
Okay. I was about to say,
Want me to read it again? You want me to read it again?
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay.
So when it comes to housing, like I said before, there's 26% of a U.S. disability population, but only 5% of homes are ready move-in accessible. And that's incredibly demoralizing for disabled people looking for independent living. What I'm not the best person to talk about what advocacy is going on with that. However, there is the Centers for Independent Living, which interestingly started in California. Like the majority of the disability rights movement across the country has its home base in California. So there are organizations that were founded there that actively do this work. Again, I would suggest the Centers for Independent Living, the protection advocacy agencies, and the ombudsman who work in disability that could help you with more with that type of advocacy. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have one from Sharon Elise. How do you see the connections among ageism and ableism, disability and aging? So that combination, how might this connection help in organizing, mobilizing people for rights and building awareness? So that connection between ageism and ableism.
I personally view ageism or aging as aging into disability more often than not, whether it be like later in your life or as you age, you have like a 1 in 5 chance of becoming disabled. But everybody's going to experience it at some time in their life. And what I try to tell people about our systems of oppression and the systemic ableism that we have in this country is whatever you neglected while you were not disabled, it will be the system you inherit when you need it.
Say that one more time, please, for the people in the back.
Sure.
That was good.
So whenever you neglected when you were not disabled, you will inherit when you become disabled or age into the system. And a lot of people do not want to contend with that. They do not want to contend with having disability and talking about disability because it is very frightening. You could lose every dime to your name just to qualify for healthcare or assisted living. You can lose in some states your right to vote. What's frightening in California that's going on is they're trying to expand the care courts, which would be expanding conservatorships and guardianships for elderly and disabled people, which strips away a lot of your autonomy as a person. What I would ask people to do to build more awareness is to invest in the system now. Invest in changing the system now, because when you need it, it'll be too late. Because again, when we talk about disability, you're not a reliable narrator of your own story as a disabled person. So when you're non-disabled, it's a time to advocate for these changes because they don't believe us when it comes time to start advocating.
That's a good point. So I have one from Belle Escalara. Hi, Imani, wonderful speech. I was wondering how folks should navigate answering the "do you have a disability?" right question on applications. Should they answer truthfully or fill out "I do not wish to answer," especially if accommodations might be required?
Here's my procedure that I've kind of whittled down. I used to be like, make sure you disclose, like it's okay. No. So the story behind mine is that when I was graduating grad school, I applied to like hundreds of jobs and disclosed in every single one of them that I had a disability. And then when I stopped disclosing, I got 6 interviews in a week after being ignored in the hundreds prior when I was disclosing. So what I tell people now is when you're in the application process, do not lie. This is important. Do not lie, but say, I wish not to answer or I wish not to disclose. And then within the first week, if you are offered employment or if you show up with a disability, I would mention it until like the first week that you are hired. And then make sure you do everything in writing. I cannot stress that enough to you. If they call you into their office and be like, we're a big family, we like to have these conversations face to face, follow up with an email. Oh, I'd like to call you. Let me talk this over with you over the phone. Follow up in an email. When I tell you so much advocacy, opportunities are lost because things are not written down. I mean it. And so you want to enter into this space with all the hopes that they're going to accommodate you and that your accessibility needs are going to be met. But with the vision of saying, if they're not, let me make sure I have these things in writing so that I can advocate for myself in this space. But yeah, that's how I try to tell people to do it. Tell them as soon as your contract is signed. That's what I like to do.
Yeah.
Because then make sure your paperwork is signed and you get everything in writing.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. Okay, Mary. I love you mentioning how isolation is disabling. This brings to mind mental health oppression and the influence of social media. Can you speak to mental health oppression, particularly in higher education?
I yeah, so when I was in college, I had a mental health crisis when I was in my first year of school. And I basically locked myself away in my dorm room for like 3 months and didn't go to class or anything. It was just like, I'm okay, I'm fine, I don't need any help. Um, and I felt completely alone. And this is before Twitter was what it is today. And I really didn't have like a community of disabled people around in my life. I was very much so isolated and normalized throughout my entire high school. I wasn't really isolated, but I was more normalized, which meant that my parents put me in regular education classes. Went to Catholic school where I didn't have an IEP. So I was pretty much alone and talk about my disability to myself. And finding online communities was so helpful for my mental health as a disabled person, because it was one of the first times that I saw disabled adults.
Yeah.
Like there's like this cliff that happens after 18 to 21 as a disabled person, where you literally, like, well, at least when was growing up, I literally didn't see anybody with a disability that wasn't Stevie Wonder or Ray Charles, especially if they were Black. Like I rarely saw that happening. So I had such a difficult time seeing my life existing beyond those years. I had no idea what to do. And then on top of that, you are an adult for the first time, and you're the only one that could advocate for yourself legally. Like your parents can't call Social Security or call Medicaid office. You have to do all that stuff yourself. And unless you have other people who have been with it through you, or have been in those trenches themselves, it's hard to feel like it's hard when you feel like those odds are insurmountable and that you have no one to turn to. So yeah, I think that online communities have given so much of space to disabled people. And especially in higher education, it could be weaponized against you. You know, if you ask for help, if you ask for leniency, you're seen as weak. And fundamentally, academic spaces do this thing where they feel being present in an academic space gives this idea to people that are already there that they've filtered out the disabled people. They've filtered out the unworthy through the application process, through the admissions process, that this is a meritocracy. So anybody who's here has merited their presence here. Therefore, they don't need any help. They don't need any accommodations. They don't need any supports. We're all here based off of merit. And we see merit as the non-existence of disability or illness. And so that it contributes a whole lot to oppression when people think about when they need to ask for help and ask for somebody to reach out to. You know.
Very good. It's eye-opening. So I have one, thank you for your presentation. Do you have any suggestions for faculty when your disability is dismissed, particularly when it's not visible? So invisible, faculty with invisible disabilities.
So if you're faculty with an invisible disability, what I recommend is you really need to reach out to either professional advocates or to other team members that work with you and can speak to your illness. I think that we need to get people used to the fact that disabilities, whether they're seen or not, are still legally protected under the ADA, and employers have a legal duty to accommodate you. You're not asking for understanding. You're not asking for special treatment. That's the law. That's the law. Okay. And like with no other law are we like, you know, it would be nice if you didn't drink and drive, but it's special treatment, you know, like, are you kidding me? With any other law, we're like, do the thing or shut up, you know? Like this is what you are legally entitled to. And I want you to walk into that room with that knowledge that any ignorance of your needs is a violation of the law. So get your advocates together, get your fellow colleagues together, and start talking with them about how you all can set up a game plan that works with your university to make sure that your needs are met, not just individually, but as a collective. Because I'm more than sure that there's probably other people with invisible disabilities or newly changing bodies that need accommodations too, that are too afraid to ask because of what you're experiencing. And silence always benefits the oppressor. So make sure you have these conversations out loud with people and you start creating these coalitions.
Yes, yes. All right, here's one. All of that. Thank you so much. I have a question regarding a lot of discourse I've seen online about self-diagnose. What are your thoughts on this? Especially considering marginalized people tend to have a harder time getting diagnosed, or it can be unsafe for them to be diagnosed and risk it being weaponized against them. That's from
Oh, I wholly support self-diagnosis. Yeah, I wholly support it. You know, if you're going to go to the doctor as a fat person, I'll go to the doctor and be like, you just need to lose weight. No, I have a sore throat. What does that have to do with my weight? Like, you know, like when we think about diagnoses, society thinks about like House MD or like Touched by an Angel or Grey's Anatomy, and they think that the diagnosis is going to come at the end of the studio hour and it's going to wrap up in a nice little bow, and everybody's going to go home getting treated adequately for their illnesses or disabilities. That so rarely happens. That's why it's a TV show. So when you are self-diagnosed, that's valid. That's okay, especially if you don't want it to be weaponized against you. Absolutely. Okay. And all the people that are like in a big tizzy about people faking disabilities, most people are thinking about people faking disabilities for like Disney fast passes or like amusement park rides. No, you are self-diagnosing yourself based off of your own symptoms and observations about your symptoms, and then doing the research to make sure that you are accommodating yourself. Okay? That is valid.
That one gets some snaps. All right, here's one. What is your relationship to optimism as a disabled person? I have difficulty maintaining this mindset through my organizing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I get that. I don't know. I try to be as optimistic as possible. I really do get down in the dumps a lot. The worse things are, the more sarcastic I will be. So I have to warn people not to take me seriously for periods at a time, because I will be sarcastic and they will think that I'm speaking earnestly. I think what's always useful though is moments of joy with other people in your community. It's one thing for non-disabled people to tell me, oh, things will get better. I don't believe you. You're not doing anything. What indicates that they'll get better? But if another disabled person's like, rough day, but we're gonna get through it, I'm like, yeah, I believe you over anybody else. Let's have some fun. Let's make sure that we are creating joy for ourselves. And that's kind of what matters, is remembering to build in space for that joy, because otherwise you'll lose sight of what's on the horizon for you.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm pausing because I'm writing it down. Build space for joy. That's a good one.
No worries.
And there's joy in the work. I hear a lot of my CFA colleagues say that a lot, that there's joy in this fight that we're doing. And I think that's what sustains us all.
Yeah, it is.
Here's one. Am I remiss in thinking there are parallels in how pregnancy and disability are treated in the workplace? And what is the lesson in that?
Nope, you're not remiss. You are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act when you're pregnant. So you are very much so on the right path of thinking. I would actually think, I've never been pregnant myself, but I would actually think pregnancy is kind of treated the way fatness is in light of disability, more so, because with disability, I mean, I guess it's all under the same umbrella, but I feel like pregnancy and fatness, there's this perception by society that you chose this, that you chose to be in this condition. Why should I have to accommodate you? Whereas for at least me, as somebody who's born my disability, people kind of look at my body and then be like, oh, that's something that like happened to her, not something that she did herself. And so I think it would be more along the lines of those things, but I think they all kind of fall under this like umbrella of experiencing fat phobia, ableism, and disability in kind of the same realm.
Mm. Wow. This is a comment more than a question, but I'm gonna read it anyway. It says, "Thank you. When added to being foreign, female, and Black, it is so hostile. Thank you for the guidance." All
Thank
right.
you.
It seems that the campus is not willing to bring campus. Wait. It seems that the campus is not willing to bring campus to legal ADA status and to accommodate invisible disabilities. What's the best way to make them follow the law? Follow the ADA law?
Get the professional advocates involved. You all are state funded, right?
Yes, partially.
Okay, great. So you have, oh, they will jump on this, by the way. Disability Rights California, contact them. They are professional advocates, and they have what's called like an automatic mandate authority or automatic access authority, which means that if you're a facility that is interfacing with any part of the disability community, they're allowed to investigate you. So there you go.
Well, there now. They
Well,
got
there-
some investigations on campus.
Yep. If they can't take on the case, which it depends on what their scope of work is at this time, but they can always recommend you to professional advocates that work in like education and disability
Hmm.
or employment and disability.
All right, so this one says, "Thank you for sharing your personal story about mental health. Great points. You mentioned not knowing anyone with disabilities as a young person. Who are your role models now?"
I unfortunately we just lost Judy Human over the last weekend. She was a fire starter. Audre Lorde as well is this disabled person. And it's really hard as being disabled and Black because our stories are so intertwined with disability, but we never really highlight the disability part of it. That we forget that most of our heroes in Black rights space had a disability. I think about people like Brad Lomax. I think about, like I said, Audre Lorde, and not really Henrietta Lacks wasn't really a hero. She was forced to be a
Mhm.
case study. So I think about those lives and the lives of people in my community. The people that I look to now are people like Sammy Shock, who just wrote Black Disability Politics. T. Franklin, who writes comics for Marvel and DC with disabled characters in them. Like things like that, like things that like spark joy. I think those matter too. And the people who write those things do too.
Mhm. So this one, I'm maybe to repeat it again, I'm not sure if she got it. A person was asking to give us the name again for the advocates in California. Maybe you
Yeah.
could just do it one more time.
I'm assuming the legal advocates at Disability Rights California.
Writing that down too.
Yeah, if you're looking for the actually I could type it in too.
Mhm. Oh, thank you. And we lost Anita Silver was a comment. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I cannot.
A lot of great presentations and
Thank you.
snaps and all that stuff going on. Thank you for dropping that in there. So I don't see more questions. I hope I didn't miss any. Scrolling through. We still have more time. Any takeaways for us? Any I remember my mother always saying, "Don't forget." Any don't forgets?
Don't forget to harass your local legislators.
Mhm.
Yeah. Make sure you're standing up for trans people specifically in this moment. They're under attack. Like we are, according to like the guidelines of genocide, we are on step 7 out of 10. That's very dangerous. We need to be very mindful of those things. We need to be watching our anti-Semitism,
Mhm.
all the biases that we have internalized. and never questioned throughout our life. We need to be seeking out answers from people marginalized in those communities and really elevating those voices. And don't forget to dream.
Mm,
Dream.
yes.
I talked the other day a little bit about how branding politics and ideas for a better future is like branding perfume through a commercial. You don't have the product in hand. You have to, in your best way, describe what it'll be like in such a way that people are enticed to create it or to get it or to have it in their hands. And that's what we need to be doing more of, is dreaming and expressing the dream about what life could be
Mhm.
if we decided to show up for one another. And I think we need to remember to do that more often.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This work involves a lot of dreaming and then working hard to get to that dream or to
Exactly.
bring that dream to life for sure. So let
Exactly.
me look and see if there's any questions that came up. No. Well, thank you, Imani, so much for your stories, your amazing work. I'm so motivated by hearing, your conversation and what you dream and what you see. It has had a really big impact on me and the work that I'm trying to do with the Disability Caucus and all the folks that are on that caucus. I just want to give a thank you to our interpreters. I believe their names are Amy and Donna. So thank you for helping us today. I'd like to thank all of you for attending the webinar. Kiki had mentioned there's the landing page, a link, I think I'm saying that right, where you'll get a lot of information about the books that our presenters have. Those of you that may be interested in taking this for a course through Chico, and we have a reimbursement for our CFA members. Important to be a CFA member. So that information is there, and any bios or workshop descriptions you'll see there as well. So I encourage you to go to the landing page. Hopefully the information that you heard here today, you can take it back to your campuses, to your classrooms, to your CFA advocate work, that we're really using the information that we're hearing today.